Okay, this is the case study for Good Teacher Turns Bad. So here's what we know. This school, Crestview Elementary, has a really good climate, really good culture, good test scores, good attendance, and parents in the community are happy with the school. And the principal, Mrs. Wilson, she is a newer principal. She's been there for 3 years, and she hasn't really rocked the boat or changed much of anything because the teachers are happy, things are going well. One teacher, Mrs. Horton, who was teacher of the year, and she is a third year teacher. She has now started having troubles at school, and she's learned that staff has told her that she's having a hard time at home with her home life. So she's noticed that she's been combative and rude to coworkers, and now we're starting to get emails and calls into the school about parents being unhappy with Mrs. Horton in the classroom, saying their child doesn't like it in there, that she yells, that she embarrasses the kids. So some parents even went as far as going to the superintendent and the school board to demand that their child get taken out of Mrs. Horton's classroom. So a meeting was set up, a parent-teacher conference, where Mrs. Wilson sat in on, and during the meeting, the parent, talked about, his concerns, and during the meeting, Mrs. Horton got really defensive and yelled at the parent and said that he was lying. Upon that, Mrs. Wilson ended the conference and said that she would follow up, and the behavior was quite inappropriate. So now we're left with what to do next. So here are some things that we need to know. As far as the students, what do the students in Mrs. Horton's class have to say about their teacher? I think it would be really beneficial to speak with some of the students in the classroom and just, nothing, too serious. Just bring them in and kind of have a casual chat about, how they feel in their classroom and how it's going. Another thing that we need to know is student progress. Is Mrs. Horton's behavior or alleged behavior affecting the students academically? What are their test scores like? How's their schoolwork going? Are they getting things done? And we need to know if there's been a meeting. Has anyone sat down and spoke with Mrs. Horton about her behavior? Based on the case study, it doesn't look like she's had a one-on-one, discussion with the principal. And we also need to know some disciplinary protocols. What are the next steps to take after, that type of behavior from a teacher with the parent? And if the accusations about how she's acting towards students, what's the next step in the district's handbook for, how to handle that discipline? So the problem in this case is a changed behavior in Mrs. Horton. She was once teacher of the year. Everyone liked her. She was great with her kids. And now she's, berating coworkers and allegedly yelling at students and embarrassing students in front of the class. Another problem is we're getting parent complaints. Parents have called and wrote to the principal complaining about Mrs. Horton's behavior in the classroom. So that's definitely an issue that needs to be addressed. The Board of Education has now gotten involved, and so now, there's a lot of pressure probably from the superintendent and Board of Education as to what Mrs. Wilson's going to do to fix the problem. And during the parent-teacher meeting, Mrs. Horton was unprepared for that meeting and also got very defensive and combative with the parents. So those are all the problems in the case. Here's my plan of action. First, I would interview some students from the class to get a feel for what types of things are going on in the class. It's always great to hear directly from the student. You can hear from the parent, you can hear from the teacher, but sometimes the student has a unique perspective, and I think in this case it would be beneficial to look at all sides and hear from all people involved. Meet with Mrs. Horton about her behavior. Definitely need to be having some sit-down, one-on-one conversations and meetings with Mrs. Horton about her behavior in the classroom as well as with the parent during the conference. I also need to work with the parents to move students if necessary. If upon investigation, if we decide that Miss Horton's actions are indeed, she's yelling at students and some students are crying and not wanting to go to school, definitely thinking about switching those students to a different classroom. And really just following up and staying in contact with the parents and the families that have expressed concern and making sure that they know that their concerns are being heard. And then Miss Horton needs an improvement plan for her behavior. This could be, setting some goals for, improving the climate of her classroom, but definitely needs an improvement plan and definitely need to make sure that I'm following up with Mrs. Horton, with evaluations and giving feedback and just keeping up with the improvement plan and making sure that she's making progress and improving. So the resolution, first off, we have disciplinary action, the improvement plan, putting her on an improvement plan. And there might be further action that's required upon, investigation from other students. Seeing if maybe offering more support can help Mrs. Horton. Maybe there is a lot going on at home and maybe she just needs a little more support in the classroom. Maybe pulling in a teacher's aide or, just someone to offer some extra support. Frequent observations, definitely making sure that Mrs. Wilson is going into Mrs. Horton's classroom and observing and giving regular feedback after she observes every time and really making sure that, she's being supportive of Mrs. Horton and her progress on the improvement plan. And also following up with the parents who express concern and to see how the child is doing and to address any existing or new concerns. So, to debrief, some of the things that I was thinking during this case study was that the principal should have spoken with Ms. Horton after the very first complaint. It sounds like there are several complaints were rolling in after, a couple of weeks, and I would have went straight to Ms. Horton to express, my concern and share what parents are saying. I also was thinking that the principal should speak with students about their experience in the classroom to hear firsthand from some students. Some of the things that I was feeling, I was disappointed to see a teacher who had a lot of passion and was teacher of the year and, used to do all the right things. I was disappointed to see her struggling. And I was also concerned for the students in the classroom if the accusations of Mrs. Horton's behavior were true. And the things that I was valuing are honesty, doing what's best for students, and working together to combat an issue. So now going to unresolved issues. So some of the things that are unresolved are students going to be moved or to a new classroom? Are some parents willing to, wait and see if things get better and talk about the improvement, keep in contact and try to make this work? Or do we need to move students? And Mrs. Horton's also, she's kind of destroyed her relationships with coworkers. And we need to see if we can address this and resolve this, because teaching is a very collaborative practice, and if we're not getting along with our coworkers, we're not able to collaborate, and that's not what's best for students. So making sure we can resolve any issues with coworkers. Component 1, which was promoting an effective and efficient management of a school or district. So the elementary school has great test scores and attendance, and the community is pleased with the school. Crestview Elementary, they're piloting a new reading program that most teachers support. When Mrs. Horton showed that she wasn't in support of the new reading program, Mrs. Wilson, the principal, set up a private conference with her to talk about her concerns. And a meeting was, we're going to hold a meeting with concerned parents about Mrs. Horton's behavior, that parent-teacher conference, and also meet with Mrs. Horton on a frequent basis to discuss the improvement plan and look at her progress. Mrs. Wilson should, to promote the well-being of every student, Mrs. Wilson should meet with students and have them talk about their experience in Mrs. Horton's classroom. Mrs. Wilson should make sure that she polls students whose parents haven't complained as well as those who have, so that you can get a good feel for, the whole class as a whole, kind of how they're feeling. Not just talking to students who have complained to their parents, to also talk to students who've stayed quiet and see if they have anything to say. Also, Mrs. Wilson and Mrs. Horton will work on an improvement plan that makes sure students' needs are being met in the classroom. To promote the academic success, Mrs. Wilson's going to do frequent observations and give a lot of feedback to Mrs. Horton's class. And she's going to have Mrs. Horton observe strong teachers. That way so Mrs. Horton is getting a lot of support from her coworkers and getting ideas on how, best practices academically. And Mrs. Horton's going to be on an improvement plan to ensure academic success. So that is my case study for this problem. Thank you.